Hello again, it's Esme Jones. Again, nice to have everybody back. So, tonight I just figured I would just kind of go over the writing process while playing Back for Blood, which is a game I really like. It's not the most popular one, but, it does its job as a Left 4 Dead successor, I suppose. We'll stick with a veteran right now. So, yeah, I get a lot of questions about lore and about my writing process. And I was kind of hoping that I might be able to clear some things up with that. So, I guess we'll do a little bit of back and forth. We'll start with some lore, and as of late, the biggest demand for lore has been around the Shadow Queen, also known as Surrian. So, let's get into her. She is actually one of my oldest characters. She came about when I was 14 years old or so, and she's kind of just stuck around ever since. And yes, I know, I'm mom here as well. Don't at me, please. But she's been with me for a very, very long time. And in that regard, I would say she's about 10,000 years old or so. Let's see, we're on veterans, so we don't really need to worry too much about... That's fine, okay. So her deal, basically, this is going to be a long one, so apologies in advance. Basically, the world that she was born in, Xiai is how you pronounce it, by the way, sorry. Basically, it operates as a conscious being. It is sentient and semi-aware of what is going on with it. And that is how it interacts with people. Magic sounds like music there, because that is the planet's way of interacting. Now, in that regard, that means that pretty much every magic user that you would run into would be some kind of creative. You would normally see people admitting magic as some kind of music, but, you know, there are instances where a magic user could be a writer or even an animator that's using their magic to bring their drawings to life. The planet really doesn't care, it just wants to interact however it can. Now, at the time, Surrian species, the Zen, or Zenian, they were basically the sole connection from the planet to the people. It was aware of them more than it was any other race. Let's see, we don't need that. And because of that, her species was quite adept at magic. They were, I guess, a little OP would be how it would be put back then. And because of that, they were actually wiped out in a massive genocide known as the Sonin, and it's called that because it was the equivalent of somebody hurtling the collective force of the sun down on their kingdom. And every single one of them, like every Zen, did not survive. They were gone. Unfortunately, after the fact, the people that instigated the genocide realized that kinda needed that species to keep the planet from dying. So, because of that, they had to recreate them in a lab setting. So, Surrian, all of her bondmates, they're not biologically related, but they cluster together in a familial-like fashion. They are all test tube babies, basically. These experiments took place at the bottom of the ocean because, you know, they didn't really want anybody to know, hey, we accidentally an entire genocide. Now hold on a second. Okay, I shot that guy several times. Maybe I'm bad, I don't know. But, yeah. So, that happened. They basically did their best to not acknowledge that it happened, and kind of carried on in secret to try and stop the apocalypse. Now, the unfortunate thing is that the apocalypse happened anyways, and in CI, the apocalypse happens in, well, it comes at the hands of 7 sea beasts, who are massive sea creatures that rise up when it's time to, you know, start over, as a polite way of putting it. And they just pick apart the world little by little. Now, the king of these sea beasts is a being known as, Rasat. Literally, the Abyss. He is about as big as the entire continent of South America. He's not a friendly person, typically. You know, he gets a little cranky at getting woken up. Now, again, they were at the bottom of the ocean when these experiments were taking place. And, you know, where else is a sea beast going to live but, unfortunately, the bottom of the ocean? That was incredibly petty. I did not need to do that to those poor people. So, he awoke. He came charging. And Surrian was actually the youngest of the group. And she was actually considered kind of a dud. Most of her siblings at that point, or her bondmates, had developed pretty supernatural powers, like pretty exemplary powers, and she was just kind of, I guess a late bloomer would be the politest way to put it. But everyone else evacuated that laboratory, and Miss Shadow Mommy did not. She kind of went in on, like, himbo logic and said, hey, you know what, if this thing is unkillable from the outside, maybe I'll just crawl down its gullet and kill it there. Which, to her credit, did work. She did actually manage to stay the apocalypse, but kind of at the cost of becoming the apocalypse herself. Now, she's been around a very long time. Canonically speaking, she is a very alien character. She's basically constantly trying to reconcile a million thoughts in one, and human emotion feels very, again, alien to her. She's just one of those people that's like, I think I'm doing this right, but I don't know. So, yeah. Basically, she spent 1,000 years in Rasat's stomach, just killing the entire ecosystem that lived in there. There was an entire civilization in there. They weren't, like, super duper keen on it, but, you know. And eventually, she was freed from that nightmare, and was able to return to the surface, which she had never seen before. And eventually, she would meet up with a man named Lucius and another man named Zoran, who would become her partners. They have been together a very long time. Lou is a cool dude. You will probably also know him as Anoxiel, or the Sun God, if you listen to, Rio's Sharing Is Caring series. Hi Rio, if you're hearing this. But he is a pretty chill guy. Soren's I mean, the easiest way to put it is he's like your grumpy half-dragon himbo kind of tsundere boyfriend. He's kind of Kratos, I guess, but like a little more full of himself. I love him to bits. He's a big boy and he's always cranky about something. But ooh, those are birds. But yeah, they have been together a very long time. Now, something that people get confused about is the Yimbos. The Yimbos and their Yisters, I guess. They want to know if they are biologically related, and the answer is no. All of them are adopted. Surrian cannot have children. She it is just something she is not capable of doing. Her biology is, for lack of a better term, fucked. She doesn't even realistically have a stomach. She, you know, she kind of had to, like, tear it out to survive 1,000 years without food and water and everything. But they're not biologically related. They are all adoption babies, and Surrian, Lou, and Zoran have actually raised thousands of orphan babies across the years. It's one of the things that I really like about her character, is the dichotomy of her character is just, well, I know I ripped out, like, the guts of a giant apocalyptic sea serpent, but I gotta pick my kids up from soccer practice. But, that's a little bit of Surrian lore. I guess cute facts for folks. She doesn't know how to drink tea properly. She will put tea bags in her mouth and then pour the boiling water into her mouth and just kind of call it good. And that's, in my opinion, adorable. It might be terrifying for some, I don't know. Team health. Let's see, she really loves spicy foods. She cannot get drunk off of any kind of alcohol, but too much sugar will turn her into a gigantic, excitable... what's the best... It'll turn her into a cheerleader, I guess would be the best way to put it. She gets very excitable and just wants to go out there and do things, but otherwise she's pretty soft-spoken and quiet. She's very shy. She doesn't really find it easy to open up to people because it's very simple for her to, you know, feel weird. Let's see. Her favorite color is actually neon green. She doesn't know why. Don't ask her. She just likes it. Between you and I, audience that is watching this, it's actually the color of Zoran's eyes. So, there's that. Which is, you know, it's no surprise that her second favorite color is yellow, because that is the color of Lou's eyes. So, yeah, that's just a little bit about Surrian. Now, the writing process with her has always been interesting, because I've always written her from the perspective of somebody who is very isolated. Just isolated and not 100% sure how to interact with people, which I'm drawing on my own experiences there for the largest part, is just that kind of, like, I want to participate, I want to be part of the cool kids club, but I don't want you to think I'm weird. Which, easier said than done, you know? Ow, bitch. Alright. But, that is basically where I started with her. One of the things I love to start with in my writing when it comes to creating new characters is, ooh, Lord, that's a Terrence. Ooh, Lord, that's a Terrence. Don't mind me. The weirdos in my friend group we call tall boys, or any variant of that particular creature, Terrences. Come on, let's go. Come on. Gonna cheese this a little bit. But, oh, cool. But yeah, something I really like to do is just kind of going first and foremost with character motivation. Especially when it's an alien character. And I'll say something like, you know, Horror of the Shade is a really good example of kind of a jumping off point for that, because you can't really get much more alien than Vic, Invictus, whatever you want to call it. The thing that I had to start with was, you know, it's a yandere script, so there has to be the lovesick aspect to it. But the twist is, what does love look like for a creature of that nature? If at all. Oh, okay, bye. Bye, Gary. Whatever. And it's kind of the same with Surrian. A lot of her journey just kind of came from, you know, just trying to figure out what would somebody like this want. I'll have to come back for that. Just, you know, when you've been isolated for so long and everything, and you've been through all of this shit, and you find it almost impossible to relate to people. Like, how do you mitigate that? And that's kind of how I found her being super motherly, because the way I rationalized it was, you know, who's going to be more accepting of, like, weird, like, eldritch nightmares crap like that than, you know, a kid that hasn't, like, had a chance to really form an opinion and can look at that and kind of say, oh, I don't know why, but I think this is cool. And kind of bouncing off of that, you know, her journey into being a partner to Lou and Zoran, to being a mother to many children in need, it all kind of unwound a lot more naturally, because I was coming at it from, one, my own experiences, oh jeez, and two, you know, just what felt like a natural progression for her character. Now, if we take that kind of character-driven motivation and we apply it to a fairly common trope within the community, we'll say tsundere bully, right? That's a classic. You know, you've seen it a million times. The motivation is almost always just, you know, haha, like, they're in love with the listener, but they don't have the, you know, emotional fortitude to admit it in a healthy way. Woo! Hello, sir. Oh, Belgian is so good. But, yeah, so you look at that and it's like, the character motivation is they're in love with the listener and they don't know how to express it. But that's more of a character predicament, more of a, like, plot point than it is a motivation. Because if they're just in love with the listener, then, you know, and they're being a dick about it, there needs to be a motivation to confess, or be better, or even, you know, push them away harder, you know, depending on the character. But you kind of have to approach it from that angle, like, of looking at these characters, these tropes, and saying, what do you want here? Now, one of my earliest series was Oni of the Morning Sun, and Hiroko easily became one of my favorite characters. I already have a soft spot for himbos, and good lord, does that man fit the niche. But, you know, I myself, I wouldn't call myself a himbo. I wish I was cool enough to be a himbo, that'd be great. Hello, sir. Let's see. Oh, but, I had to look at him from that perspective and figure out what kind of, like, what his motivation would be, you know? And I looked at him and I thought, you know, he seems like he would be, first and foremost, all about proving himself, you know? That just suits his character really naturally. So I was like, okay, but why would he be showing up here to bother this, like, sassy shrine maiden, you know? And I was like, well, I mean, she's gonna be a badass fighter anyways, but he doesn't seem exactly like the kind of guy that would just be like, Lamau, fight me IRL. Well, maybe he would be, but in this case, I figured it would be more of a, you know, monster versus human thing. And that's kind of where the story unwound from there, is just the priestess having this sort of perspective that he doesn't. And them kind of slowly coming to appreciate and even love each other. Now, the funny thing is that when this began, I 100% will be real with you guys, the priestess was supposed to die in the end. It was a horrifically sad ending, and I'm so sad that I even wrote it in the first place. Oh, Bywalker. No. Ooh. I don't like how the giant meatball screams at you. It's very eight-legged spiders, and I don't think I appreciate that. Even though I love eight-legged freaks, excuse me. dog. What the fuck? Okay. Come on. But yeah, but at the same time, when I was kind of arriving at that conclusion, I realized these two have a lot more stories to tell, I think. Like, they ended up complementing each other incredibly well. And that's kind of how that story wound out, is I started with, you know, the character motivation was like, yeah, this makes sense. And I think that's one of the most important things I can say as a writer. Just one of the most important pieces of advice I can give you is learn to trust yourself. And I know that sounds impossible, but the more you learn to kind of develop a keen sense of what is and isn't working for you, the less struggle you're going to get when it comes to revision and everything. Because you'll kind of get an acute sense of like, oh, I like this, or oh, I don't like. Ooh, I'm on big boy. Never mind. But learning to trust yourself is super duper important, I think, and that's why you shouldn't be afraid to experiment. When I wrote The Fallen Angel, for example, I had never written a psychological thriller before. I shouldn't be trying to long shot this with a bell. Yeah, well. But it was one of those things where it was like, oh, this is a spy story, kind of. It's a spy story with, like, heroes and villains, and it's, you know, it's World War II and all kinds of crazy shit's happening. And, you know, the sleeper agent thing became more interesting to me than the hero and villain thing. And I realized that that was something I could like, expand on later. Meaning the hero and villain thing. And it is something I plan on doing, for sure. But the story became more about the drama for me, the just very interpersonal connection between these people that are going through it, to put it mildly. Oh, jeez. Alright, whatever. Come on. Come on. Get out of this house. But yeah, never be afraid to experiment. Never be afraid to just experiment and, you know, test things until you feel comfortable with yourself, basically. At this point, I have been writing so long that if something isn't working for me, I have developed enough of a sense to know this isn't gonna work at all, or... oh, no, that's a crusher. Nope. Bye, bitches. Come on. No, bye, Evangel. Sheesh. But, yeah, you should try and develop a sense of what works for you. You should develop a sense of trusting yourself. Because, you know, the uncertainty is one of the most difficult things, I think, when it comes to writing. Is just looking at it and being like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this. And if that's the case, you need to figure it out. At least from my perspective. So that's your lore for the evening. There's your writing tips for the evening. I know I'm not terribly good at this, so my apologies. I do hope that some of this is useful. And if people leave me questions about lore that I can't answer immediately, then I'll do my best to answer them here. Let's see. But I do hope we're going to be having some more streams and stuff soon. Maybe even with friends. I mentioned on Twitter that my partner would be hopefully helping me write a script from scratch, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, thank you for joining me for this little tiny bit of lore Back for Blood and writing advice. I'm still Esme Jones, for better or worse, and I hope you all have a good night. Bye!